The notification on my phone lit up just as I was stepping out of my midnight blue Tesla Model S Plaid. "Mom's here picking up leftovers again," the text read, followed by 3 laughing emojis. I froze, my hand still on the car door, watching through the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows as my daughter Jessica quickly shoved her phone into her purse. She was sitting at a corner table with her friends, the same group of 20-somethings who always seemed to look right through me whenever I dropped by her apartment with groceries or offered to help with her rent. What she didn't know was that the leftovers I was picking up were from a business dinner I'd just finished with the CEO of Austin General Hospital, discussing a 7-figure contract renewal for my cleaning services. What she didn't know was that the car I was stepping out of cost more than most people make in 2 years. What she didn't know was that her mother, the woman she introduced as just a house cleaner whenever we crossed paths in her social circles, had built an empire that employed over 200 people across Texas. But I couldn't blame her. For 5 years, I'd made sure she had no idea who I really was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I've spent the last 5 years of my life pretending to be poor while secretly running a multi-million-dollar business. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I've asked myself the same questions you're probably asking right now. Why would someone hide success? Why would a mother lie to her own daughter about who she really is? Why would I let my 22-year-old daughter believe I'm struggling to make ends meet when I could buy her entire apartment building without blinking? The answer starts 5 years ago, on a Tuesday morning that changed everything. Jessica had just started her senior year at UT Austin, majoring in marketing with dreams bigger than the Texas sky. She was dating this boy, Marcus, whose family owned half of Westlake Hills, and she'd started coming home with stories about his mother's charity work and his father's country club connections. The way she talked about their lifestyle, their casual mentions of vacation homes and private schools, I could see something shifting in her eyes. She was falling in love not just with Marcus, but with the idea of belonging to that world. That's when she asked me the question that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. "Mom, what exactly do you do for work? Like, how do I explain your job to people?" I was standing in the kitchen of our modest apartment in East Austin, the one I'd moved into after her father Robert left us when she was 17. I'd been preparing for a video conference with my facility managers, reviewing quarterly reports that showed Martinez Facility Solutions was on track to break $50 million in revenue that year. But to Jessica, I was just her mom who cleaned houses and came home smelling like pine sol and exhaustion. "I run a cleaning service, mija, you know that. But is it a real business or do you just clean houses for people?" The way she said, "just clean houses," felt like a knife between my ribs. There was shame in her voice, embarrassment that she was trying to hide behind genuine curiosity. This was my daughter, the girl I'd raised to believe that honest work was honorable work, that there was dignity in every job that put food on the table. But somewhere between high school and college, between her father's abandonment and her new boyfriend's influence, she'd started buying into the idea that some work was more valuable than others. I could have told her the truth right then. Could have pulled up the bank statements showing 8-figure balances. Could have shown her the contracts with major corporations. Could have explained that Martinez Facility Solutions wasn't just a cleaning service, but a comprehensive facility management company that handled everything from hospitals to universities to tech campuses. I could have told her that the reason I worked such weird hours wasn't because I was scrubbing toilets at night, but because I was managing operations across 3 time zones. Instead, I smiled and said, "It's small, but it pays the bills." The relief in her eyes was immediate, and that's when I knew I'd made a mistake that would define the next 5 years of our relationship. She didn't want to know the truth. She wanted permission to be embarrassed by me, wanted confirmation that her mother was exactly what she feared I was: poor, simple, forgettable. So I gave her what she wanted, and in doing so, I created a prison. For both of us. The deception started small. I kept my old Honda Civic instead of driving one of the company cars. I made sure Jessica never saw the corporate credit cards or the business phone that rang constantly with calls from clients and employees. When she'd visit my apartment, I'd hide the laptop where I managed million-dollar contracts behind throw. Pillows on the couch. I'd schedule all my important meetings for times when she was in class or at work, handling the business that was growing exponentially through video calls and encrypted messages. Maria Santos, my business manager and closest friend, thought I'd lost my mind. "Sarah, this is insane. You're hiding from your own daughter like you're running some kind of criminal operation. She's 21 years old. She can handle knowing her mother is successful." But Maria didn't understand the look I'd seen in Jessica's eyes, the way she lit up when she talked about Marcus's family, the way she'd started speaking differently, carrying herself differently, like she was trying on a new identity. I'd built my business from nothing, starting with a single cleaning cart and a determination to provide for my daughter after her father walked out on us. Every client I'd gained, every employee I'd hired, every contract I'd won, it had all been for her. To give her opportunities I'd never had, to ensure she'd never have to worry about money the way I had growing up. But success, I was learning, came with its own complications. Jessica had grown up watching me work multiple jobs, had seen me, exhausted and stressed during the early years when I was building the foundation of what would become Martinez Facility Solutions. She remembered the woman who came home with aching feet and worried about making rent. That version of her mother made sense to her, fit into the narrative of struggle and sacrifice that she could understand and even respect. The successful version of her mother, the woman who'd turned that struggle into triumph, who'd built something significant from nothing, apparently was harder for her to accept. So I became an expert at living two lives. During the day, I'd run board meetings via video conference from my home office, making decisions that affected hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in revenue. I'd negotiate contracts with hospital administrators, review expansion plans for new markets, and analyze reports that showed consistent growth quarter after quarter. Then, in the evenings, I'd change into my oldest clothes, grab my cleaning, supplies, and maintain a small route of residential clients just to keep up the appearance of struggling. The residential route served multiple purposes. It kept my hands in the actual work that had started my empire, reminded me where I'd come from and why I'd started this journey. But more importantly, it provided a cover story that Jessica could verify if she ever got curious. She could drive by Mrs. Patterson's house on Wednesday afternoons and see my Honda parked outside. She could smell the cleaning products on my clothes when I got home. She could see the modest checks I'd deposit into the account she had access to, the one I used for my official income. What she couldn't see was the corporate headquarters downtown, housed in a gleaming office building where my real work happened. She couldn't see the fleet of vehicles with the Martinez Facility Solutions logo, the hundreds of employees who depended on the business I'd built, the clients who trusted us with their most important facilities. She couldn't see the penthouse apartment I'd bought myself, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lady Bird Lake, where I'd sit some evenings and wonder if I was protecting my daughter or betraying her. The hardest part wasn't maintaining the physical deception. It was watching Jessica struggle financially while I had more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. She'd call me, stressed about student loans or worried about making rent, and I'd transfer just enough money to help without raising suspicions. 500 here, 1,000 there, always with explanations about picking up extra clients or getting a bonus from one of my regular customers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Mom, you don't have to help me," she'd say, the guilt clear in her voice. "I know money's tight for you too." If only she knew that the amount I was giving her was less than what I made in interest every hour. But the deception was working, at least from her perspective. Jessica had graduated with honors, landed a job at a trendy marketing firm in South Austin, and was building the kind of life she'd dreamed about. She'd broken up with Marcus during her senior year, not because of his family's wealth, but because she'd realized she was trying to become someone she wasn't. She'd started dating David Chen instead, a sweet guy whose family had built a successful tech company, but who valued substance over status. I was proud of the woman she was becoming, proud of her independence and her work ethic. She was making her own way in the world, building her own success, and she was doing it without relying on family money or connections. In my mind, that validated everything I'd sacrificed to maintain the deception. But pride and regret make complicated bedfellows, and as Jessica settled into her post-college life, I found myself increasingly isolated by the lies I'd created to protect her. The loneliness was crushing in ways I hadn't expected. I had employees who respected me, clients who valued my work, and a business that was thriving beyond my wildest dreams. But I couldn't share any of it with the person who mattered most. I couldn't tell Jessica about the contract we'd just won with the University of Texas, managing facilities for the entire campus. I couldn't share my excitement about expanding into Dallas and Houston markets. I couldn't even complain about the normal stresses of running a large business, because I wasn't supposed to have a large business to run. Instead, our conversations revolved around her life, her job, her apartment, her boyfriend. I listened to her talk about office politics at the marketing firm, about campaigns she was working on, about her dreams of maybe starting her own agency someday. I offered advice when I could, drawing on my years of business experience while pretending it came from common sense rather than hard-won expertise. "You should trust your instincts more, mija," I'd tell her when she doubted her proposals. At work. "You have good ideas. Don't let other people's opinions make you second-guess yourself." "Mom, you always know exactly what to say. How do you always have such good business advice?" Experience, baby. Life teaches you things, even when you're just cleaning houses. Another lie, casual and automatic, added to the mountain of deceptions that were becoming the foundation of our relationship. The worst part wasn't even the lying. It was the way Jessica had started treating me. The subtle condescension that crept into her voice when she talked about my work. The way she'd steer conversations away from my life and toward hers, as if my experiences weren't worth discussing. She'd started introducing me differently too, not as her mother who ran a business, but as her mother who works really hard, with an emphasis that suggested I was someone to be pitied rather than respected. I told myself it was temporary, that someday I'd find the right moment to reveal the truth. But as months turned into years, the right moment never seemed to come. Jessica was building her career, finding her place in the world, becoming the independent woman I'd always wanted her to be. Why complicate that with revelations about her mother's secret empire? The rationalization was comfortable, but it was also hollow. Deep down, I knew I was maintaining the deception not for her benefit, but for mine. I was terrified that if she knew the truth, she'd question everything about our relationship, wonder if my love and support had strings attached, doubt whether she'd earned her achievements on her own merit. I was afraid that wealth would change how she saw me, change how she saw herself, change the dynamic between us in ways I couldn't predict or control. So I continued living in the shadows of my own success, watching my daughter from a distance, while pretending to be someone I wasn't. I attended her company's holiday parties as the humble cleaning lady who was proud of her successful daughter. I met her friends as the hardworking single mother who'd sacrificed everything to put her kid through college. I played the role perfectly, so perfectly that sometimes I almost forgot it was a role at all. But success has a way of demanding recognition, and secrets have a way of demanding revelation. After 5 years of careful balance, of meticulous deception, of loving my daughter from behind a mask of false humility, everything was about to change. It started with a text message and a midnight blue Tesla, and it would end with truths that neither of us were prepared to face. The morning. After I saw that text message, I woke up in my penthouse apartment with the familiar weight of dread settling in my chest. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Austin's skyline stretched out before me, the morning sun casting golden light across the lake. It was beautiful, peaceful, and completely at odds with the turmoil churning inside me. In 3 hours, I had a board meeting with my senior management team to discuss our expansion into the Dallas market. In 5 hours, I was supposed to pick up Jessica for lunch, driving my beat-up Honda and pretending that my biggest concern was whether Mrs. Patterson would need her baseboards cleaned this week. I made coffee in my state-of-the-art kitchen, the one with granite countertops and appliances that cost more than most people's cars, and tried to push away the image of Jessica's embarrassed face from the night before. But I couldn't stop thinking about that text message, about the casual cruelty of those laughing emojis, about the way my own daughter had reduced me to a punchline in front of her friends. Mom's here picking up leftovers again. The words stung because they weren't entirely wrong. From Jessica's perspective, that's exactly what I was. The struggling single mother who showed up at nice restaurants, not because I belonged there, but because I was collecting charity. Her friends probably saw me as this pathetic figure, the woman who couldn't afford to eat at the places where her successful daughter dined, who had to rely on handouts to experience even a taste of the good life. If they only knew that I'd been at that restaurant for a legitimate business dinner, that the leftovers I was collecting were from a meal that cost more than Jessica's monthly grocery budget, that the contract I'd just signed would generate enough revenue to buy that entire restaurant chain if I wanted to. But they didn't know, because I'd made sure they couldn't know. The irony was suffocating. I'd built Martinez Facility Solutions into one of the most successful facility management companies in Texas. But to my own daughter, I was just Sarah the house cleaner, someone to be embarrassed by and explained away. My phone buzzed with a text from Maria, my business manager and the only person who knew the full extent of my deception. Board meeting moved to 10. Johnson wants to discuss the UT contract expansion. Also, your daughter called the office yesterday, asking for you. I told her you were at a client site, but she seemed confused about why you have a corporate number. My blood ran cold. Jessica had called the office? Why would she do that? I'd been so careful to keep my business phone separate, to make sure she only had my personal number. But Maria was right to be concerned. Having a corporate number didn't fit the image of a small-time cleaning lady who worked for individual homeowners. I called Maria immediately. She answered on the first ring, her voice carrying the efficient warmth that had made her invaluable to both my business and my sanity over the past 5 years. Sarah, we need to talk about this situation. With Jessica, it's getting complicated. What exactly did she say when she called? She said she'd been trying to reach you on your cell, but it went straight to voicemail. She found the Martinez Facility Solutions number online and called looking for Sarah Martinez. When I told her you were at a client site, she asked why a cleaning lady would need a corporate office number. I closed my eyes, feeling the walls of my carefully constructed lie beginning to crack. What did you tell her? I told her that some cleaning services use answering services to coordinate schedules, that it made you seem more professional to potential clients. She bought it, but Sarah, she's not stupid. She's going to start asking more questions. Maria was right, of course. Jessica had always been sharp, observant, the kind of person who noticed inconsistencies and puzzled them out until they made sense. It was one of the qualities that made her so good at her marketing job, and it was exactly what I'd been afraid of all these years. I'll handle it, I said, though I had no idea how. Will you? Because this can't go on forever. You're running a $50 million company while pretending to be someone who struggles to pay rent. Do you know how exhausting it is to watch you diminish yourself every time she's around? Maria had never been one to sugarcoat things, which was part of what made her such an effective business partner. But her bluntness hit harder than usual because I knew she was right. I was exhausted, not from running the business, but from constantly monitoring myself constantly remembering which version of Sarah I was supposed to be in any given moment. I know it's complicated, but she's happy. She's building her own life, her own success. If I tell her the truth now, it changes everything. It changes everything for the better, Sarah. She could be proud of you instead of embarrassed. She could understand where her work ethic comes from, why you always have such good advice about business and life. She could see that success isn't something to be ashamed of, especially when it's built honestly. After we hung up, I sat in my living room, surrounded by the luxury I'd earned through years of hard work and sacrifice, and tried to remember why I'd started this deception in the first place. It had seemed so clear 5 years ago, so necessary. Jessica was struggling with her identity, trying to figure out where she fit in a world that seemed to value wealth and status above character and effort. I'd wanted to protect her from the complications that money brings, wanted her to know me as her mother, rather than as a successful businesswoman. But somewhere along the way, the protection had become a prison. Not just for me, but for both of us. I changed into my work clothes, the carefully chosen outfit that made me look like exactly what Jessica believed I was. Faded jeans, a simple t-shirt, worn sneakers that had seen better days. I left my hair unstyled, skipped most of my makeup, and traded my luxury car for the Honda that wheezed and complained, but served its purpose as a prop in the elaborate performance of my false life. The drive to my official office, the small storefront space I maintained in East Austin, felt longer than usual. This office was another piece of the deception, a place where I could meet Jessica if she ever wanted to see where I worked, complete with basic furniture, a few cleaning supplies, and business cards that listed only residential services. It was functional enough to be believable, but modest enough to support the story of a woman who was barely getting by. The real Martinez Facility Solutions headquarters was downtown, occupying 3 floors of a glass office building with views of the Capitol. We had conference rooms equipped with the latest technology, a break room that looked like it belonged in a tech startup, and offices for department heads who managed everything from human resources to fleet maintenance. It was the kind of workplace that Jessica would have been proud of, the kind of operation that demonstrated what her mother had built from nothing. But Jessica had never seen any of it. Instead, she knew about the cramped storefront where I spent just enough time to maintain the illusion. She'd visited once, early in the deception, and I'd watched her take in the modest space with a mixture of pride and pity that broke my heart. She was proud of me for working hard, for being independent, for building something even if it was small. But there was pity, too, for the mother who was trapped in circumstances that seemed to limit her potential. "It's perfect for you, Mom," she'd said, and I knew she meant it kindly. "You're doing exactly what you love, helping people, building relationships with your clients. Not everyone needs to run some big corporation to be successful." She was trying to make me feel better about my limitations, trying to help me see the dignity in small-scale work. Her intentions were good, but her words revealed how she saw me, as someone whose dreams had been appropriately sized down to match her circumstances. The phone rang, interrupting my brooding. It was Mrs. Patterson, one of my actual residential clients, the ones I maintained to keep my cover story intact. "Sarah, honey, I hate to bother you, but could you come by today instead of tomorrow? My daughter's flying in from Dallas and I want the house to be perfect." "Of course, Mrs. Patterson, I'll be there this afternoon." These clients, the handful of homes I still cleaned personally, were both a blessing and a curse. They provided authenticity to my story, gave me a legitimate reason to come home smelling like cleaning products and complain about aching feet. But they also served as a constant reminder of the gap between who I was and who I pretended to be. Mrs. Patterson had been one of my first clients, back when I really was just a woman with a cleaning cart trying to make ends meet. She'd watched me build my business from the ground up, had celebrated with me when I landed my first commercial contract. She knew about Martinez Facility Solutions, knew about my success, and she'd been baffled when I asked her to keep it confidential. "Why would you hide something like that, dear? You should be proud of what you've accomplished." I'd explained about Jessica, about wanting my daughter to see me as her mother rather than as a businesswoman, about the complications that wealth could bring to family relationships. Mrs. Patterson had listened with the patience of someone who'd raised 4 children of her own, and while she didn't entirely understand my reasoning, she'd agreed to keep my secret. "Just promise me you won't keep this up forever," she'd said. "Secrets have a way of growing heavier over time." 5 years later, I was beginning to understand what she meant. The cleaning work itself had become meditative over the years, a way to stay connected to the roots of my business while everything else grew increasingly complex. There was something honest about scrubbing floors and organizing closets, something that grounded me in reality when the corporate side of my life felt overwhelming. But it was also a performance now, a role I played for an audience of one. When Jessica called while I was at Mrs. Patterson's house, I made sure to sound appropriately tired, to mention the specific tasks I was doing, to complain about clients who were difficult or demanding. "How was your day, mija?" "Good, long. Mrs. Patterson decided she needed her whole house deep cleaned because her daughter's visiting. I'm exhausted." "Mom, you work too hard. You should raise your prices. You're worth more than what you're charging." If only she knew that Martinez Facility Solutions charged premium rates and delivered exceptional value, that our clients paid us well because we provided services that were worth every penny. If only she knew that I wasn't undervaluing myself in the marketplace, I was undervaluing myself in her eyes. Maybe someday. Right now, I'm just grateful for steady work. Another lie, casual, and automatic, added to the thousands I'd told over the years. The system I'd created to maintain this deception was intricate and exhausting. I had separate phones, separate bank accounts, separate wardrobes for different aspects of my life. I scheduled my real work around Jessica's availability, making sure I was never caught in a board meeting when she wanted to have lunch, never unavailable when she needed advice or support. Maria handled most of the day-to-day operations, serving as my public face when necessary while I remained in the background. Our employees knew me as the owner and founder, but they also knew that I valued privacy and preferred to work behind the scenes. It was an unusual arrangement, but not unheard of in the business world. The financial juggling was perhaps the most complex part. I maintained a modest personal account that Jessica could see, where I deposited the small amounts. I earned from residential cleaning and withdrew money for basic living expenses. The real business accounts, the ones with 8-figure balances, were managed through a separate banking relationship under my corporate identity. When I helped Jessica with money, which I did regularly despite her protests, I made sure it came from the right account and in amounts that seemed reasonable for someone in my supposed financial situation. $500 for car repairs, $1,000 for her security deposit when she moved apartments, $2,000 for a laptop when hers died during a crucial project at work. Each transaction required careful consideration. Too little and she'd struggle unnecessarily. Too much and she'd wonder how a house cleaner could afford to be so generous. I walked a constant tightrope between supporting my daughter and maintaining the fiction of my limitations. The emotional cost of this system was harder to quantify, but no less real. I'd built something extraordinary, created jobs for hundreds of people, generated millions in revenue, established a reputation for excellence in my industry. But I couldn't share any of that pride with the person whose opinion mattered most to me. Instead, I watched Jessica build her own career from what she believed was a position of disadvantage. She worked harder because she thought she had to, because she believed she didn't have family connections or resources to fall back on. In some ways, that had made her stronger, more determined, more appreciative of her achievements. But it had also created a distance between us that I hadn't anticipated. Jessica saw me as someone who'd done her best with limited options, someone to be loved and supported, but not necessarily admired or emulated. She was protective of me in the way you'd be protective of someone fragile, someone who needed care rather than someone who could provide guidance. When she talked about her career challenges, she'd often preface her complaints with apologies. "I know this sounds silly compared to your real problems, Mom, but my boss is being unreasonable about this campaign deadline." My problems weren't real problems in her mind. They were small, manageable, the concerns of someone whose life operated on a different scale than hers. She was trying to be considerate, trying not to burden me with worries that might seem trivial compared to the struggle she imagined I faced every day. But her consideration felt like condescension, and her protection felt like pity. I was her mother, the woman who'd raised her, who'd worked multiple jobs to put her through school, who'd sacrificed everything to give her opportunities. But I wasn't someone she looked up to anymore. Someone she saw as successful or accomplished in any meaningful way. The irony was devastating. I'd hidden my success to preserve our relationship, but in doing so, I'd fundamentally altered the dynamic between us. Instead of being equals, we'd become patron and charity case, with Jessica playing the role of the successful daughter who took care of her struggling mother. She'd started bringing me groceries, insisting on paying for dinner when we went out, offering to help with my rent when she thought I was struggling. Her generosity came from a place of love, but it was built on a foundation of lies that made me feel sick every time I accepted her help. "Mom, let me get this," she'd say when the check came at restaurants, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone trying not to hurt feelings while offering charity. "You don't need to do that. Mija, I can pay my own way." "I know you can, but I want to. You've done so much for me. Let me take care of you for once." Taking care of me. As if I needed taking care of. As if I wasn't perfectly capable of taking care of myself and her and half of Austin if necessary. But I'd smile and accept her generosity, because refusing would have raised questions I wasn't prepared to answer. The system was working, in the sense that Jessica remained unaware of my true circumstances, but it was also slowly destroying the authentic relationship I'd been trying to protect. Every lie created more distance. Every deception made real intimacy more difficult. Every performance made me feel more like a stranger in my own daughter's life. And now, with Jessica starting to ask questions about things like corporate phone numbers and business operations that didn't quite make sense for a simple house cleaner, the carefully balanced system was beginning to show cracks that I wasn't sure I could repair. The foundation of lies I'd built to protect our relationship was becoming the very thing that threatened to destroy it. But after 5 years of deception, I had no idea how to tell the truth without losing everything I'd been trying to preserve. Despite everything that was wrong with our relationship, there were moments when the deception faded into the background and Jessica and I found our way back to each other. These moments usually happened when we were alone together, away from her friends and the social pressures that made her hyper-aware of appearances. During these precious times, she would forget to be embarrassed by me, and I would forget to monitor every word for potential slip-ups about my real life. Our Saturday. Morning coffee dates became sacred to me. Jessica would pick me up from the East Austin apartment in her little Toyota, and we'd drive to this hole-in-the-wall cafe near South First that served the best breakfast tacos in the city. She'd tell me about her week at the marketing firm, about campaigns she was developing, about office dynamics and client challenges. I'd listen with the kind of focused attention that only a mother can provide, offering advice that drew on decades of business experience while being careful to frame it as common sense rather than expertise. "There's this client who keeps changing his mind about everything," she told me one Saturday, stirring extra sugar into her coffee with frustrated energy. "Every time we present a concept, he loves it, then calls back 2 days later wanting something completely different. My boss is getting annoyed because we're burning through our budget on revisions." I sipped my café con leche, thinking about the dozens of similar situations I'd navigated in building Martinez Facility Solutions. Clients who didn't know what they wanted, who confused activity with progress, who needed to be managed as much as served. What does your gut tell you about what he really wants? I asked. I don't know. I mean, he says he wants something innovative and cutting edge, but every time we show him something creative, he gets nervous and asks for something more traditional. Sounds like he's scared, I said. Sometimes people ask for bold because they think that's what they're supposed to want, but when they see it, they realize they're not ready for the risk. Maybe he needs to feel safe before he can be brave. Jessica paused with her taco halfway to her mouth, considering this perspective. You think I should present him with a safer option first? Build his confidence before pushing the creative envelope? What do you think? You know him better than I do. She was quiet for a moment, and I could see her mind working through the possibilities. This was my favorite part of these conversations, watching her think through problems, seeing her natural intelligence and intuition in action. That's actually brilliant, Mom. If I can get him comfortable with a solid traditional approach first, then maybe he'll trust us enough to take some creative risks later. You would have figured that out yourself, I said, and meant it. You just needed to stop focusing on what he was saying and start paying attention to what he was feeling. These conversations filled me with a pride that was both pure and complicated. I was proud of Jessica's intelligence, her work ethic, her natural problem-solving abilities. But I was also proud of my own ability to guide her, to offer insights that helped her succeed. The tragedy was that she had no idea where my business wisdom came from, no understanding that her mother had faced and solved similar challenges on a much larger scale. She thought my advice came from general life experience, maybe from watching people during my years of cleaning houses, observing human nature from the perspective of someone who was largely invisible in wealthy homes. It was a reasonable assumption, and one that allowed her to accept my guidance without questioning its source. But oh, how I longed to tell her about the real experiences behind my advice. About the time I'd navigated a similar client situation with a hospital administrator who couldn't decide between cost savings and quality improvements. About the negotiation strategies I'd developed over years of securing multi-million-dollar contracts. About the leadership lessons I'd learned while building a company from a single employee to over 200. Instead, I smiled and watched her solve her problems with insights that she believed came from her own wisdom, supplemented by the common-sense observations of her hardworking mother. The coffee dates weren't our only source of connection. Jessica had also started a tradition of cooking Sunday dinners for us, usually at her apartment but sometimes at my East Austin place. She'd found some family recipes online, Mexican dishes that reminded her of her grandmother's cooking, and she'd experiment with different ingredients and techniques while we talked about everything and nothing. Abuela never wrote anything down, she said one Sunday, stirring a pot of pozole that smelled like childhood memories. I wish I'd learned to cook from her instead of trying to figure it out from YouTube videos. Your grandmother believed that cooking came from the heart, not from recipes, I said, watching Jessica taste the broth and frown slightly. She used to say that measurements were just suggestions, that you had to listen to the food and let it tell you what it needed. That's poetic, but not very helpful when I'm trying to figure out if this needs more cumin or more chili powder. I moved to the stove, taking the wooden spoon from her hands and tasting the pozole myself. It was good, very good, but it needed something to balance the richness. Try a little lime juice, I suggested, and maybe a pinch of oregano. She added the ingredients, tasted again, and her face lit up with satisfaction. Perfect. How did you know that would work? Practice. Lots of mistakes over the years. Another truthful answer that wasn't the whole truth. I had learned through practice and mistakes, but not just in my own kitchen. Martinez Facility Solutions had catered events for major clients, and I'd worked closely with the chefs we hired, learning about flavor profiles and ingredient combinations. I'd also hosted business dinners at my penthouse, cooking elaborate meals for potential clients and partners, using food as a way to build relationships and demonstrate attention to detail. But Jessica saw my culinary knowledge as the hard-won wisdom of a single mother who'd learned to stretch ingredients and create satisfying meals on a budget. She had no idea that I'd served pozole very similar to this one to the CEO of Austin General Hospital, or that the recipe I'd guided her through was actually a refined version of something I'd learned from a professional chef I'd hired for a corporate event. These Sunday dinners became a space where we could talk about deeper things, where the conversation moved beyond work challenges and daily logistics to dreams and fears and family history. Jessica would ask about her father, about the early years of their marriage, about what I'd hoped for when I was her age. "Did you always want to run your own business?" she asked one evening, cutting vegetables for a dish she was attempting from a recipe she'd found in a food magazine. The question caught me off guard because it was so directly related to the truth. I was hiding. I had always wanted to run my own business, had dreamed of building something from nothing, of creating opportunities for other people while proving my own capabilities. But I couldn't say that without raising questions about why those dreams had been limited to such a small scale. "I wanted independence," I said carefully. "I wanted to be able to take care of you without having to depend on anyone else." "But didn't you want more? I mean, didn't you have bigger dreams?" There was something wistful in her voice, something that suggested she was asking about more than just my past aspirations. I wondered if she was thinking about her own dreams, about whether she was being ambitious enough in her own career. Dreams are complicated, Mija. Sometimes what looks like settling is actually choosing what matters most. But you're so smart. Mom, you give better business advice than half the consultants my company hires. You understand people and strategy and how to solve problems. Didn't you ever want to do something bigger with those skills? The irony of the moment was almost unbearable. Here was my daughter, recognizing my abilities, seeing my potential, wondering why I hadn't achieved more with my talents. She was essentially asking why I'd wasted my life on small-scale work when I clearly had the capacity for greater things. If only she knew that I hadn't wasted anything, that I'd built exactly the kind of business she was imagining, that I'd used those skills she recognized to create something significant and meaningful. If only she knew that the reason I gave such good business advice was because I'd lived through the challenges she was facing, had made the mistakes she was trying to avoid, had learned the lessons she was still discovering. "Maybe I am doing something bigger," I said, thinking about the hundreds of employees who depended on Martinez Facility Solutions, about the clients whose facilities ran smoothly because of the systems we'd implemented, about the economic impact we had on communities across Texas. "Maybe it just doesn't look the way you'd expect." She considered this, her hands still busy with the vegetables, her mind clearly working through the implications of what I'd said. "You mean like how raising me was bigger than any business you could have built?" Something like that. It wasn't a lie, exactly. Raising Jessica had been the most important work of my life, the foundation that everything else was built on. But it also wasn't the complete truth, and the gap between my words and reality felt like a chasm that was getting harder to navigate. These conversations, these moments of genuine connection, were what made the deception feel worthwhile. When Jessica looked at me with respect and affection, when she asked for my advice and valued my opinions, when she shared her dreams and fears with the trust that only exists between mother and daughter, I could almost convince myself that I was protecting something precious and irreplaceable. But the conversations also highlighted everything that was missing from our relationship. Jessica saw me as wise but limited, loving but constrained by circumstances beyond my control. She respected my character but pitied my situation. She valued my insights, but had no understanding of where they came from or how they'd been earned. The gap between who I was and who she thought I was created a constant undercurrent of sadness in even our happiest moments together. I would watch her solve problems at work, see her grow in confidence and capability, Observe her building the kind of life I'd always wanted for her, and feel simultaneously proud and hollow. Proud because she was becoming everything I'd hoped she would be. Hollow because she was doing it without really knowing me, without understanding the example I'd set, without seeing the proof that her dreams were achievable because her mother had already achieved them. There were times when I came close to telling her everything. Usually late at night, after we'd shared a bottle of wine and talked about life and dreams and the challenges of being women in a world that still questioned our capabilities. In those moments when her guard was down and mine was wavering, I would feel the words building in my throat like pressure behind a dam. "Jessica, there's something I need to tell you. Something about my business, about what I've really built." But then she would say something that reminded me why I'd started the deception in the first place. "I'm so glad you're not caught up in all the corporate nonsense, Mom. You're real in a way that most successful people aren't. You haven't lost touch with what actually matters." Or she would make a comment about someone we both knew who had money, someone whose wealth had complicated their family relationships or changed their personality in ways Jessica found disturbing. Look at the Hendersons. Ever since his business took off, they've become completely different people. Their kids are spoiled and entitled, and they act like they're better than everyone else just because they have money now. These moments would remind me that Jessica saw wealth as potentially corrupting, success as potentially isolating. She valued authenticity over achievement, character over capability. In her mind, I embodied these values precisely because I wasn't driven by money or status, because I'd chosen family over ambition, love over luxury. How could I tell her that I'd actually chosen both? That I'd found a way to build financial success while maintaining my values? That I'd created a business that prioritized people over profits? That I'd proven it was possible to be wealthy and wise, successful, and authentic? The answer was that I couldn't. Not without fundamentally changing how she saw me and how she saw herself. So I continued to treasure these moments of connection while living with the constant awareness that they were built on a foundation that wasn't entirely solid. But even as I recognized the problems with our relationship, I also saw real beauty in what we'd created together. Despite the lies and the limitations, despite the things I couldn't share and the truths I couldn't tell, we had built something genuine and meaningful. Jessica trusted me, valued my opinions, enjoyed my company, and loved me in a way that felt unconditional. She would call me when she had good news to share, when she got a promotion, or landed a big client, or received recognition for her work. She would call me when she had bad days, when she was frustrated or discouraged, or needed someone to remind her of her own capabilities. She would call me just to talk, just to share the small details of her daily life, just to maintain the connection that sustained us both. "Mom, you'll never guess what happened at work today," she'd begin, and then launch into a story that would make me laugh or worry or swell with pride. These phone calls were lifelines for me, reminders that beneath all, the deception and complication, we were still mother and daughter. We still needed each other, still brought joy to each other's lives, still provided the kind of support that only family can offer. But they were also reminders of everything I was missing, everything I couldn't share. When Jessica told me about her successes, I wanted to celebrate by telling her about my own achievements, about the challenges I'd overcome and the goals I'd reached. When she shared her struggles, I wanted to offer specific guidance based on my experience navigating similar situations in my own business. Instead, I listened and advised and celebrated and commiserated from behind the mask of limitation I'd created for myself. I was present for her victories and defeats, but she wasn't fully present for mine because she didn't know they existed. The asymmetry of our relationship became more apparent as Jessica grew more successful in her own career. She was being promoted, taking on bigger responsibilities, earning recognition for her innovative campaigns and strategic thinking. Her confidence was growing, her salary was increasing, and her lifestyle was improving in ways that made the gap between us seem even wider. She started talking about buying a house, about maybe starting her own agency someday, about dreams that were expanding as her capabilities became clearer. I watched her plan for a future that was bright with possibility, and I felt both thrilled for her success and sad that I couldn't fully participate in her excitement. "I'm thinking about looking at places in South Austin," she told me over coffee one Saturday, scrolling through real estate listings on her phone. "Nothing too fancy, but something with enough space for a home office. Maybe even a little guest room where you could stay when you visit." The idea of having a guest room for me, of being the visiting parent rather than the host, felt strange and somehow diminishing. But it also demonstrated how our roles had shifted over the years. Jessica was becoming the successful one, the one with options and opportunities, while I remained frozen in the role of the struggling single mother who needed taking care of. "That sounds wonderful, Mija. I'm proud of how hard you've worked for this." "I learned from the best," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You taught me that success isn't about having advantages. It's about making the most of whatever opportunities you get." Another moment where her words contained both truth and tragic irony. I had taught her about success, about resilience, about making the most of opportunities. But I'd done it while hiding the proof of my own success, while pretending that I hadn't made the most of my own opportunities. She saw my teachings as theoretical wisdom, guidance based on observation and hope rather than experience and achievement. She had no idea that her mother was living proof of everything she was learning about success, that the woman giving her advice about building a business had already built one far more successful than anything Jessica was currently imagining. As these golden moments continued, I found myself caught between gratitude and grief. Gratitude for the relationship we did have, for the love and trust and connection that transcended the lies. Grief for the relationship we could have had, for the mentorship I could have provided, for the example I could have set if I'd been brave enough to let her see my true accomplishments. But the grief was tempered by hope, by the belief that someday I would find the right moment to reveal the truth, to share the reality of what I'd built and what it meant. Someday Jessica would be secure enough in her own success that she could celebrate mine. Someday our relationship would be strong enough to withstand the shock of revelation. Someday the timing would be perfect for honesty. I lived for these golden moments while planning for that someday, not realizing that the longer I waited, the more difficult the truth would become to tell, and the more devastating its revelation would be for both of us. The invitation to David's company party arrived on a Thursday in March, delivered to Jessica's apartment in an envelope so thick and elegant that I could feel its expense from across the room. She opened it with the careful attention she gave to anything related to David's family, her expression shifting from curiosity to excitement, to something that looked almost like panic. "It's the Chen family's annual spring celebration," she said, holding the invitation like it might burst into flames. "David's parents host it every year for employees and their families. It's apparently a big deal." I watched her reread the invitation, noting the careful calligraphy, the embossed logo of Chen Technologies, the formal language that suggested this was more than just a casual gathering. "That sounds lovely, Mija. I'm sure you and David will have a wonderful time." "That's the thing, Mom. The invitation specifically mentions family members. David's been talking about wanting his parents to meet you. He thinks it's weird that we've been dating for over a year and they've never met my mother." My stomach dropped. Meeting David's parents meant entering their social circle, being introduced to people who would categorize me within seconds of our first interaction. It meant being examined by individuals who were accustomed to evaluating others based on education, profession, and social connections. I'm sure they're very nice people, but I wouldn't want to feel out of place at such a fancy event. "Mom, you wouldn't be out of place. You're smart and funny and kind. Those are the things that actually matter." But even as she said the words, I could see the concern in her eyes. She wanted to believe that character mattered more than social status, but she also knew that first impressions were often based on superficial markers of success. She was worried about how I would be perceived, and more importantly, how those perceptions might reflect on her. What would I even wear to something like that? I asked, though I had a closet full of designer clothes at my penthouse that would be perfect for the occasion. We could go shopping, she said quickly. I could help you find something appropriate. It doesn't have to be expensive, just something that looks professional and elegant. The offer was generous and well-intentioned, but it also highlighted the fundamental problem with our situation. Jessica was prepared to dress me up like a doll, to transform me into a version of myself that could pass in her boyfriend's social circle. She wasn't asking David's parents to accept me as I was. She was planning to present a carefully curated version that wouldn't embarrass her. Let me think about it, I said, though I already knew I couldn't attend. The risk was too great. The potential for discovery too high. David's parents were successful business owners who moved in circles where my real identity might be recognized. They attended charity galas and industry events where Martinez Facility Solutions was sometimes mentioned. They might know clients of mine, might have heard my name in business contexts. But more than that, I couldn't bear the thought of being paraded around as Jessica's charity case mother, the woman who needed coaching on how to dress and what to say. I couldn't stand the idea of playing the role of the grateful poor relation who was honored to be included in such elevated company. Actually, you know what? I think you should go and enjoy yourself without worrying about me. This is about you and David, about your relationship with his family. I don't need to be part of that. Jessica's face fell, disappointment and relief, warring in her expression. She wanted me there because she loved me and wanted to share important moments with me. But she was also relieved because my absence would eliminate the potential for awkwardness or embarrassment. Are you sure, Mom? Because I really do want you there. I want David's parents to meet the woman who raised me, who taught me everything important I know about life and work and relationships. I'm sure, Mija. You go and have a wonderful time. Tell me all about it afterward. But as she left that evening, I could see that I'd disappointed her. She'd been hoping I would rise to the occasion, would find a way to be the mother she could proudly introduce to David's successful parents. Instead, I'd confirmed her worst fears about my limitations, about my inability to adapt to her increasingly sophisticated world. The party was scheduled for the following Saturday, and as the date approached, I found myself thinking obsessively about what it represented. Jessica was building a life that I couldn't fully participate in, forming relationships with people who would never see me as anything more than a curiosity, a reminder of her humble beginnings. David's parents would be polite, certainly. They would express appropriate admiration for my work ethic and sacrifice. They would probably make generous comments about the dignity of honest labor and the importance of service work in society. But they would also file me away in their minds as someone they'd met once, someone who occupied a completely different world from theirs. The tragedy was that I actually belonged in their world more than Jessica realized. I could have held my own in any conversation about business strategy or market expansion. I could have shared insights about managing growth and maintaining company culture that would have impressed them with their depth and relevance. I could have been not just acceptable, but genuinely valuable as a connection, someone worth knowing, for reasons beyond politeness. But I couldn't be any of those things without revealing the truth, and I wasn't ready for that revelation. So instead, I stayed home while Jessica attended the party alone, and I spent the evening wondering if I was protecting our relationship or slowly destroying it with my continued deception. Saturday evening, I sat in my penthouse apartment, wearing clothes that cost more than Jessica's monthly rent, drinking wine that was older than she was, looking out at a view that most people could only dream of affording. The irony was suffocating. While my daughter was at a party making excuses for her absent mother, I was living the life of luxury that would have made me welcome at any social gathering in the city. My phone buzzed with updates throughout the evening. Photos of Jessica and David looking radiant and happy, group shots with his family and their friends, images of elegant food and beautiful decorations. She looked like she belonged completely, like she'd found her place in this world of success and sophistication. "Wish you were here," one text read, accompanied by a photo of her laughing at something David's father had said. "Me too," I replied, though I wasn't sure it was true. Part of me did wish I could have been there to see her happiness, to meet the people who were becoming important to her. But part of me dreaded the thought of sitting through an evening of careful conversation, monitoring every word to avoid revealing anything that might contradict my carefully constructed image. When Jessica called me the next morning, her voice was bright with excitement about the evening. "Mom, you would have loved David's parents. They're so down to earth despite having all this success. His mother asked about you, wanted to know about your business and how you'd built it from nothing. I told her about how hard you work, how you've never compromised your values even when things were difficult." That was kind of her to ask. She said she admires women who create their own opportunities, who don't wait for someone else to give them permission to succeed. I think she would have really enjoyed talking with you about business and entrepreneurship. The conversation continued, but I found it hard to concentrate on Jessica's words. All I could think about was the missed opportunity, the connection that could have been made, the relationship that might have developed if I'd been free to be myself. David's mother sounded like exactly the kind of person I would have enjoyed knowing, someone who understood the challenges of building a business and maintaining integrity in competitive markets. We could have shared stories and insights, could have supported each other's ventures, could have become genuine friends rather than polite acquaintances. Instead, she would remember me as the absent mother who couldn't find a way to attend her son's important party, the woman who worked so hard that she couldn't take a single evening off to support her daughter's relationship. "Maybe next time," Jessica said as our conversation wound down. "David's family does a lot of entertaining. I'm sure there will be other opportunities for you to meet them." "Maybe," I agreed, though I knew there wouldn't be. Each opportunity I declined would make the next one more awkward, would reinforce the impression that I was someone who didn't quite fit into Jessica's expanding world. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the golden period of our relationship, the time when we could connect despite the deception, was beginning to fade. Jessica's life was growing larger and more complex, filled with people and experiences that required a level of sophistication I couldn't fake without risking exposure. Soon, I would have to choose between maintaining my cover and maintaining my relationship with my daughter. The comfortable middle ground where we could pretend the lies didn't matter was disappearing, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what would come next. The text message that changed everything arrived at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in April. I was in the middle of a conference call with my senior management team, discussing the final details of our expansion into Houston, when my personal phone lit up with Jessica's name. "Mom, emergency. Can you meet me at Cafe Medici on South Lamar? I really need to talk to you." The urgency in her message made my stomach clench with worry. Emergency could mean anything from a breakup with David, to problems at work, to health issues. I wrapped up the meeting as quickly as possible, telling Maria to handle the Houston details while I dealt with a family situation. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Jessica in the crowded cafe, still wearing the designer blazer and silk blouse I'd worn to the office, quickly covered by a cardigan I kept in my Honda for exactly these situations. Jessica looked frazzled, her usual composed appearance disrupted by anxious energy and what looked like tears she'd been trying to hide. "What's wrong, Mija? What happened?" She took a shaky breath, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup like it was anchoring her to reality. "I got laid off today. The agency lost 3 major clients last month, and they had to cut 20% of their staff. They said it wasn't about performance, that I was actually one of their strongest junior associates, but that didn't matter when they needed to reduce costs." The relief that flooded through me was immediate and selfish. Not a health crisis, not a relationship disaster, just a career setback that could be fixed. But then I saw the devastation in Jessica's eyes, the way this job loss had shaken her confidence and threatened her carefully planned future. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I know how much that job meant to you." "It's not just the job, Mom. It's everything. The house I was looking at, the plans I was making, the life I thought I was building. Without steady income, I can't qualify for a mortgage. I can barely afford my apartment rent without dipping into my savings, and those won't last more than a few months." I watched her struggle with the reality of financial uncertainty, something I'd shielded her from for her entire adult life. Part of me wanted to immediately offer to help, to solve all her problems with a single phone call. But Sarah, the struggling house cleaner, couldn't afford to support an unemployed daughter, at least not in any meaningful way. "We'll figure it out," I said, the words feeling hollow even as I spoke them. "You're talented and hardworking. Another opportunity will come along. When? And what if it doesn't pay as well? What if I have to start over at the bottom somewhere else?" Her voice was rising with panic, drawing glances from other cafe patrons. I feel like such an idiot for thinking I could build this life, for believing I belonged in that world. "You do belong," I said firmly. "Don't let one setback make you question everything you've accomplished." Do I, though? Sometimes I feel like I've been playing dress-up, pretending to be someone I'm not. Like eventually everyone would figure out that I'm just the daughter of a house cleaner who got lucky for a while. The words hit me like a physical blow. Here was my daughter, internalizing shame about our family background, limiting her dreams, because she believed her origins defined her potential. She was doing exactly what I'd been trying to prevent by hiding my success, but my deception had created a different kind of limitation. "Jessica, listen to me. Your background doesn't determine your future. Where you come from doesn't define where you can go. Easy to say, harder to believe when you're sitting in a cafe telling your mother you can't afford next month's rent." That's when she said the words that broke my heart completely. "I'm sorry, Mom. I know you're probably worried about how you're going to help me when you're already working so hard just to get by yourself. I feel terrible putting this burden on you when you've already sacrificed so much." She was apologizing for needing help. She was worried about being a burden to her mother, who she believed was barely making ends meet. She was carrying shame about her circumstances and guilt about their impact on me, all because she had no idea that helping her would be as easy as transferring money from one account to another. "You're not a burden," I said, my voice thick. With emotion I was struggling to control. "You're my daughter. Helping you isn't a sacrifice, it's a privilege. But I know money's tight for you too. I've seen how hard you work, how tired you get. I can't ask you to take on more clients just to support me while I figure out what's next." The irony was suffocating. She was protecting me from financial strain that didn't exist while suffering through struggles I could eliminate instantly. She was limiting her dreams to avoid burdening the mother who had the resources to fund any dream she could imagine. "Let me worry about my finances," I said. "Right now, we need to focus on getting you back on your feet." We spent the next hour talking through her options, creating a plan that would keep her afloat while she searched for new opportunities. I offered to cover her rent for the next few months, framing it as money I'd been saving for emergencies. She protested, of course, worried about depleting my modest reserves, but eventually accepted when I convinced her it was either that or move back in with me. The thought of Jessica moving into my tiny East Austin apartment, the one I maintained, as a prop for my deception, was terrifying on multiple levels. The space was too small to hide my real life for long, too limited to contain the business calls and video conferences that kept Martinez Facility Solutions running. After we parted that afternoon, Jessica heading home to update her resume and me supposedly returning to clean Mrs. Patterson's baseboards, I sat in my Honda in the cafe parking lot and tried to process what had just happened. My daughter was struggling, genuinely afraid about her future, and I had the power to eliminate every one of her concerns with a single conversation. I could offer her a position at Martinez Facility Solutions, a role that would challenge her marketing skills while giving her insight into a different kind of business success. I could introduce her to contacts in my network, people who could open doors she didn't even know existed. I could show her that setbacks were just redirections, that true security came from building multiple revenue streams and developing diverse skills. Instead, I was pretending to be as vulnerable as she was, offering help that seemed generous from someone in my supposed circumstances, but was actually a fraction of what I could provide. The weight of the deception felt heavier than ever as I drove to my penthouse that evening. I'd spent 5 years telling myself that I was protecting Jessica from the complications of wealth, but what I was really doing was protecting myself from the vulnerability of being fully known. Maria was waiting for me in my home office, laptop, open to spreadsheets that showed the healthy financial state of our growing empire. "How's Jessica?" she asked without looking up from her screen. "She got laid off today." Maria's hands stilled on the keyboard. "I'm sorry. I know how much that job meant to her. She's panicking about money, worried about burdening me with her problems. She has no idea that her mother could buy the agency that just fired her." "Sarah, this is exactly what I've been talking about. This is why the deception has to end. She's suffering unnecessarily, and you're suffering watching her suffer. I offered to help with her rent. You offered crumbs when you could give her a feast. You offered temporary relief when you could provide permanent security. You're both living smaller lives than you need to because you're afraid of the truth." Maria was right, of course. She'd been right for 5 years. But I'd been too stubborn and too scared to listen. Now, watching Jessica struggle with problems I could solve instantly, the absurdity of the situation was becoming impossible to ignore. What if she resents me for lying? What if she questions every memory, every moment we've shared? What if knowing the truth changes how she sees herself, makes her doubt her own achievements? What if it doesn't? What if she's proud of you? What if she's relieved to know where her business instincts come from? What if the truth actually brings you closer together instead of driving you apart? I spent the next week watching Jessica navigate her job search with a determination that made me proud and an anxiety that made me sick. She was networking, interviewing, following up on leads, doing everything right. But she was also second-guessing herself, wondering if her previous success had been a fluke, questioning whether she really had the skills to compete in a challenging market. "Maybe I should look at smaller agencies," she told me during one of our coffee dates. "Places where the expectations aren't so high, where I won't be in over my head." You weren't in over your head at your last job. You were thriving until external circumstances changed. Was I, though? Or was I just lucky to be working with good clients on projects that made me look better than I actually am? This self-doubt was new, and it was heartbreaking. The confident young woman who'd been ready to buy a house and start her own agency was being replaced by someone who questioned her basic competence. The job loss had shaken more than her financial security. It had damaged her sense of self-worth. "Jessica, you need to stop diminishing your abilities. You're skilled, creative, and hardworking. Any agency would be lucky to have you. You have to say that because you're my mom. But what if I really am just average? What if I've been fooling myself about my potential?" I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shake her, to force her to see herself the way I saw her. Brilliant, capable, full of untapped potential that was being constrained by artificial limitations. I wanted to tell her about the marketing campaigns I'd developed for Martinez Facility Solutions, about the brand strategies that had helped us win major contracts, about the business insights that came naturally to her because she'd inherited them from a mother who'd built an empire from nothing. Instead, I offered generic encouragement while watching her shrink into a smaller version of herself. The breaking point came 2 weeks later, at a restaurant I never should have been at, in a car I never should have driven, in circumstances that finally made my two worlds collide in the most spectacular way possible. I was having dinner at Uchi with the CEO of St. David's Healthcare, discussing a potential contract that would expand our hospital cleaning services throughout Central Texas. It was a crucial meeting, one that required me to be fully present as Patricia Martinez, successful businesswoman and industry leader. The conversation was going well, better than expected. Dr. Williams was impressed with our safety protocols, our staff training programs, and our track record with other healthcare facilities. We were discussing implementation timelines when I saw Jessica walk into the restaurant with David and another couple. My first instinct was to hide, to excuse myself to the bathroom until they were seated far enough away that recognition would be unlikely. But Dr. Williams was in the middle of explaining the unique challenges of their surgery suites, and leaving would have been professionally inappropriate. So I stayed, hoping that Jessica would be too focused on her companions to notice her mother across the restaurant. But as luck would have it, they were seated at a table with a clear view of mine, and it didn't take long for Jessica's gaze to find me. I watched the confusion cross her face as she tried to reconcile what she was seeing. Her mother, who claimed to barely make ends meet, sitting in one of Austin's most expensive restaurants, dressed in clothes that clearly weren't from Target, engaged in what looked like a serious business discussion with a man in an expensive suit. I saw her say something to David, saw him look in my direction with curiosity. I saw her pull out her phone, probably to text me, then hesitate as she realized the awkwardness of the situation. Dr. Williams was still talking, but I was having trouble concentrating on his words. All my attention was focused on Jessica, on the questions I could see building in her mind, on the moment when my carefully constructed deception would finally crumble. "Mrs. Martinez, is everything all right?" I forced my attention back to the conversation, apologizing for my distraction and trying to focus on the contract details. But I could feel Jessica's eyes on me throughout the rest of the dinner, could sense her confusion and concern growing with each minute that passed. When Dr. Williams and I finished our meal and prepared to leave, I knew I had no choice but to walk past Jessica's table. There was no other exit, no way to avoid the confrontation. That was coming. "Mom?" Jessica's voice was uncertain, almost hesitant, as if she wasn't sure the well-dressed woman walking by was actually her mother. "Hi, sweetheart. I didn't expect to see you here." I could say the same thing. Her eyes took in my appearance, the expensive restaurant, the business papers I was carrying. "This is David, and our friends Mike and Amanda. Everyone, this is my mother." The introductions were awkward, full of unspoken questions and confused energy. David shook my hand politely, but I could see him trying to reconcile Jessica's descriptions of her struggling mother with the woman standing before him in designer clothes. "What brings you here tonight?" Jessica asked, her tone carefully neutral. "Business dinner," I said, which was true, but incomplete. "Oh, I didn't realize you had business dinners." The statement hung in the air between us, loaded with implications. Neither of us was ready to address in front of an audience. "We should probably let you get back to your evening," I said, desperate to escape before more questions could be asked. "Right. Of course. I'll call you tomorrow?" "Sure, Mija. Enjoy your dinner." I walked out of the restaurant knowing that everything had changed, that the careful balance I'd maintained for 5 years was about to collapse. Jessica had seen enough to know that something didn't add up, and she was too smart to let it go, without investigation. The valet brought my Tesla around, and I saw Jessica's eyes widen as I accepted the keys. This was the moment of complete revelation, the instant when the last piece of my deception fell away. I could have tried to explain it, could have claimed I was borrowing the car, or that the clothes were gifts, or that the business dinner was some kind of unusual circumstance. But as I looked at my daughter's face, saw the confusion and hurt and dawning realization in her eyes, I knew that the time for lies had finally ended. I got into the Tesla without another word, leaving Jessica standing on the sidewalk with her friends, watching her mother drive away in a car that cost more than her annual salary. The drive home felt endless, every mile weighted with the knowledge that I would soon have to face the consequences of 5 years of deception. Jessica would have questions, and this time I wouldn't be able to deflect them with carefully crafted explanations. My phone was already buzzing with texts by the time I reached my penthouse. "Mom, we need to talk. That was your car, wasn't it? How long have you been lying to me? Who are you, really?" I sat in my living room, surrounded by the luxury I'd hidden from my daughter, and finally accepted that the reckoning I'd been dreading was about to begin. The call came at 8 the next morning. Jessica's voice was controlled, but I could hear the anger and hurt underneath her careful composure. "I want to see where you really live. I want to understand what's been going on. Can you pick me up? Or should I call an Uber? I'll pick you up. In the Tesla?" "Yes, Jessica, in the Tesla." The drive to her apartment was silent, both of us processing the magnitude of what was about to happen. When she got into the car, she looked around, the interior with the same confusion I'd seen at the restaurant, trying to understand how her struggling mother could afford such luxury. "Nice car," she said finally. "Thank you." "How long have you had it?" 2 years. 2 years. She repeated the words like they were foreign. "So this whole time, while I've been worried about your finances, while I've been trying to help you with money, you've been driving around in a car that costs more than most people make in a year." "Yes." The simple admission seemed to deflate some of her anger, replacing it with a sadness that was somehow worse. "I don't understand, Mom. I don't understand any of this." "I know, and I'm going to explain everything. But first, I want to show you something." I drove her to my penthouse, parking in the private garage that housed not just the Tesla, but also the Honda I'd used for our deception, and 2 other vehicles I'd never let her see. She followed me to the elevator in silence, her eyes taking in details that must have seemed surreal after years of believing I lived in a modest apartment. When the elevator opened into my living room, Jessica stopped in the doorway, her mouth slightly open as she took in the space. Floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive furniture, artwork that belonged in museums, a kitchen that looked like something from a magazine. "This is where you live," she said, not really a question. "This is where I live." She walked slowly through the space, touching surfaces, examining details, trying to process the disconnect between this reality and everything she'd believed about my life. "How?" she asked finally. "How is any of this possible?" And so I told her everything. About Martinez Facility Solutions, about the business I'd built from a single cleaning cart, about the employees and clients and contracts that had generated the wealth she was seeing, about the decision I'd made 5 years ago to hide my success, about the reasons that had seemed so important at the time. I told her about the corporate headquarters she'd never seen, about the contracts with major institutions, about the expansion plans and growth strategies that occupied most of my working hours. I told her about the careful deception I'd maintained, about the separate bank accounts and the staged apartment and the Honda I drove only when she might see me. Jessica listened without interrupting, her face cycling through emotions I couldn't read. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time, staring out at the view of Austin's skyline, processing information that changed everything she thought she knew about her mother and herself. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why would you hide this from me?" I tried to explain about her father's family, about the custody battle, about my fear that wealth would complicate our relationship or change how she saw me. I talked about wanting her to know me as her mother rather than as a successful businesswoman, about protecting her from the pressures and expectations that money could bring. But as I spoke, the reasons that had seemed so compelling 5 years ago sounded hollow and selfish. I could see in Jessica's face that she wasn't buying my explanations, that she understood the real truth I was still trying to avoid. "You were ashamed," she said quietly. "Not of the money, but of me. You were afraid I wouldn't be able to handle knowing who you really are. That's not true, isn't it? You thought I was so shallow, so weak, that I couldn't love you if I knew you were successful. You thought I would judge you or treat you differently, or somehow be damaged by the truth." The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to be devastating. I had been afraid of her reaction, afraid that success would change our dynamic in ways I couldn't control. I was trying to protect you. From what? From having a mother I could be proud of. From understanding where my work ethic came from. From seeing proof that success was possible. From the complications that money brings to relationships. The only complication here is the lying, Mom. The money isn't the problem. The deception is the problem. She was right, of course. The wealth itself wouldn't have changed anything fundamental about our relationship. But the lies I'd told, to hide it, had poisoned everything, creating distance where there should have been intimacy, shame where there should have been pride. I made a mistake, I admitted. I thought I was protecting us both, but I was just protecting myself from having to be vulnerable with you. Do you know what the worst part is? Jessica's voice was thick with emotion. It's not that you lied about money. It's that you let me believe I was a burden. You let me worry about being too expensive, about asking for too much, about adding stress to your already difficult life. You watched me make myself smaller to avoid inconveniencing you, and you said nothing. The truth of her words hit me like a physical blow. I had watched her limit her dreams, constrain her requests for help, apologize for needing support, all while knowing that I had more resources than she could imagine. "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling inadequate for the magnitude of what I'd done. "Are you? Or are you just sorry you got caught?" It was a fair question, one I couldn't answer immediately. Was I sorry for the deception, or just sorry that it was over? "I'm sorry for all of it," I said finally. "For the lying, for the distance it created, for the burden I put on you by making you worry about me when you had your own challenges to face." Jessica walked to the window, looking out at the city spread below us. From this height, Austin looked manageable, contained, like something that could be understood and navigated successfully. "I need time," she said without turning around. "I need to process all of this, to figure out how I feel about it, to decide what comes next." "I understand. Do you? Because I'm not sure you understand anything about how this feels. Finding out that your entire relationship with your mother has been based on lies, that every conversation about money and success and dreams has been contaminated by deception." She turned to face me then, and I could see tears in her eyes that she was fighting to control. "I lost my job 2 weeks ago, Mom. I've been panicking about my future, questioning my abilities, wondering if I'm strong enough to rebuild my career. And the whole time, my mother has been running a multi-million-dollar company, proving every day that success is possible, that setbacks can be overcome, that women can build empires from nothing." "Your success has nothing to do with mine," I said. "You've earned everything you've achieved." "Have I? Or have you been pulling strings behind the scenes, making phone calls, opening doors? How do I know what's real and what's been orchestrated?" The question revealed a fear I'd never considered, that Jessica would doubt her own accomplishments if she knew about mine. But as I looked at her, saw the strength and intelligence and determination that had always defined her, I realized that her achievements were entirely her own. "You earned everything yourself," I said firmly. "I never interfered in your career, never used my connections to help you, never did anything but give advice when you asked for it. Advice based on experience you couldn't tell me about. Yes. So even our conversations about work and dreams and building a life, even those were contaminated by the lie. I wanted to argue, to explain that my advice had always been genuine, that the insights I'd shared came from love rather than deception. But I could see that Jessica needed to process this revelation on her own terms, needed to decide for herself what parts of our relationship had been real and what parts had been performance. "I should go," she said, moving toward the door. "Jessica, please, can we talk about this more? Can we figure out how to move forward?" "I don't know how to move forward, Mom. I don't know how to have a relationship with someone I don't actually know." "You know me. You've always known me. The business, the money, those are just details. I'm still the same person who raised you, who loves you, who would do anything for you. Are you? Because the person who raised me valued honesty and authenticity. The person who raised me taught me that character mattered more than money, that success was meaningless without integrity. If you're that same person, then how do you explain 5 years of lies?" I didn't have an answer that would satisfy her, didn't have words that could bridge the gap between my intentions and my actions. She left my penthouse that afternoon, and I didn't know when or if she would come back. The revelation I'd dreaded for 5 years had finally happened, but instead of relief, I felt only loss and regret. I sat in my expensive living room, surrounded by all the trappings of success I'd hidden from my daughter, and realized that I'd achieved everything I'd ever wanted professionally while failing at the thing that mattered most personally. The days that followed were the longest of my life. Jessica didn't call or text, didn't respond to the messages I sent apologizing and explaining and pleading for another chance to make things right. I threw myself into work, approving expansion plans and reviewing quarterly reports and attending meetings that generated millions in revenue. But none of it mattered without Jessica to share it with, without the relationship that had been my motivation for building the business in the first place. Maria tried to be supportive, reminding me that healing would take time, that Jessica needed space to process everything she'd learned. But I could see the concern in her eyes, could tell that she was worried about the damage I'd done to the most important relationship in my life. 2 weeks after our confrontation, Jessica finally called. "I want to see the business," she said, without preamble. "I want to understand what you built, what you've been hiding from me." "Of course. When would you like to come?" "Now." I picked her up in the Tesla, the pretense of the Honda finally abandoned. The drive to Martinez Facility Solutions headquarters was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts about what this visit would mean. When we arrived at the downtown office building, Jessica looked up at the gleaming facade with something that might have been pride mixed with bewilderment. "This is yours?" 3 floors. 3 floors. I led her through the offices, introducing her to employees who greeted me with genuine warmth and respect. She met Maria, who welcomed her with careful kindness, understanding the delicate nature of the situation. She saw the conference rooms where I made decisions that affected hundreds of lives, the technology that coordinated operations across multiple cities, the evidence of a business built on competence and integrity. "How many people work for you?" Jessica asked as we toured the operations center. 237 in Texas. We're expanding to Louisiana and Oklahoma next year. 237 people depend on you for their livelihoods. We depend on each other. I couldn't do any of this without them. She was quiet as we walked through the rest of the facility, taking in details that revealed the scope and sophistication of what I'd built. In the break room, she noticed the photos on the bulletin board, pictures of employees at company picnics and holiday parties, evidence of a workplace culture that valued people over profits. "They love working here," she observed. "I hope so. I've tried to create the kind of company I would want to work for. The kind of company I would want to work for, too." The comment was casual, but it contained the first hint of possibility. I'd heard from her since the revelation. As we prepared to leave, Jessica stopped at the reception desk, looking at the Martinez Facility Solutions logo, at the mission statement displayed prominently in the lobby. "Reliable service, exceptional integrity, genuine care," she read aloud. "Is that real, or is it just marketing?" "It's real. It's the foundation everything else is built on. The foundation you didn't think I could handle knowing about. The foundation I was afraid would change how you saw me." She turned to face me then, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something other than hurt and anger in her eyes. "Mom, this doesn't change how I see you. This makes me understand who you've always been. The work ethic, the business advice, the way you've always encouraged me to dream bigger, it all makes sense now." "Then why are you still so angry?" "Because you didn't trust me with the truth. Because you thought I was too weak or shallow or judgmental to love you for who you really are. I never thought you were weak." "Then what? What were you so afraid of?" I took a breath, preparing to give her the most honest answer I could. "I was afraid that if you knew how successful I was, you'd question whether I loved you for yourself, or for what you might become. I was afraid that money would complicate our relationship the way it complicated my marriage to your father. I was afraid that you'd see me as Patricia Martinez, the businesswoman, instead of Mom, and that would change something fundamental between us. But I'm not Dad, and I'm not his family. I'm your daughter. I'm the person you raised to value character over cash, to judge people by their actions rather than their bank accounts. Did you really think so little of your own parenting that you believed I'd love you less for being successful?" The question hung in the air between us, revealing the core of my mistake. I had raised Jessica to have strong values, to prioritize substance over status, to respect hard work and integrity above wealth and position. But then I'd acted as if I didn't trust those values to hold when tested by the truth about my own success. "I was wrong," I said simply, "about all of it. I was wrong to hide who I am, wrong to underestimate your ability to handle the truth, wrong to let fear drive my decisions for 5 years." "You were wrong," she agreed, "but I think I understand why you did it." We drove home in a silence. That felt different from the angry quiet of previous weeks. This silence was contemplative, full of possibility rather than pain. When we reached Jessica's apartment, she didn't immediately get out of the car. "I lost my job because the agency couldn't afford to keep me," she said quietly. "But you could offer me a job, couldn't you? You could give me opportunities that would challenge me, teach me things about business I could never learn anywhere else." "I could, but I won't. Not unless you want me to. I won't try to fix your life or solve your problems or make decisions for you. You're capable of building your own success, just like you always have been." "What if I wanted to learn from you? What if I wanted to understand what you've built and maybe be part of it?" The offer was more than I'd dared to hope for, but I needed to be sure she was making the choice for the right reasons. "Why? Because you need a job? Or because you're genuinely interested in what we do?" "Both, but mostly because I want to. Know my mother, the real one. I want to understand the woman who built all this while raising me to believe that success was about more than money. I want to learn from someone who proved that you can be wealthy and ethical, successful and caring. It wouldn't be easy. I'd be your boss, not just your mother. The standards would be high, the expectations clear. I wouldn't give you special treatment or easier assignments. I wouldn't want you to. I want to earn whatever opportunities you give me. And if it doesn't work out, if mixing family and business creates problems we can't solve, then we'll figure it out together, like family does." 6 months later, Jessica and I were sitting in my penthouse, sharing takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant and reviewing the marketing campaign she'd developed for our expansion into the Dallas market. She'd started as a junior marketing coordinator at Martinez Facility Solutions, but her innovative approaches and fresh perspectives had quickly earned her additional responsibilities and recognition from the entire management team. The hospital administrators in Dallas are responding well to the personal touch, she reported, showing me engagement metrics from the digital campaign she'd created. The testimonials from current clients are testing especially well. People want to know that their facility management company cares about more than just the bottom line. Good instincts. Healthcare is all about trust and reliability. If they don't believe we genuinely care about their patients and staff, they'll never trust us with their facilities. Is that why you got into healthcare contracts originally? Because you cared about the impact on patients? Partially, but also because hospitals have the highest standards and the most complex needs. If you can succeed in healthcare, you can succeed anywhere. These conversations, where we could talk openly about business strategy and career development, had become my favorite part of our rebuilt relationship. Jessica was learning about industry dynamics and client management while I was learning about digital marketing and contemporary communication strategies. We were genuinely helping each other grow professionally while deepening our personal connection. The integration of our professional and personal lives hadn't been seamless. There had been moments of tension when Jessica felt I was being too protective or when I struggled to separate my roles as mother and boss. But we'd worked through each challenge, establishing boundaries and expectations that allowed both relationships to thrive. "I've been thinking about something," Jessica said, setting down her pad thai and giving me the serious look that usually preceded important conversations. "What's that?" "I want to expand our services, not just facility management, but comprehensive workplace consulting. Help companies create environments that support both productivity and employee well-being." The idea was ambitious and innovative, exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach that could differentiate Martinez Facility Solutions in an increasingly competitive market. "Tell me more." "Think about it, Mom. We already understand how physical environments affect performance and satisfaction. We know what makes spaces functional and comfortable and safe. What if we combined that expertise with consulting on organizational culture, communication systems, employee engagement, strategies?" I could see the vision taking shape in her mind, could imagine the possibilities she was describing. It was the kind of expansion that would require significant investment and careful planning, but it also represented the natural evolution of what we'd already built. It would be a major undertaking: new staff, new training programs, new marketing approaches. We'd essentially be creating a second company under the Martinez brand. "I know, but I think we could do it. I think there's a real market for integrated workplace solutions, especially as companies become more conscious about employee satisfaction and retention." "You'd want to lead this initiative? If you think I'm ready, if you trust me with something this important." Looking at my daughter, seeing the passion and intelligence and determination in her eyes, I felt the kind of pride that had nothing to do with wealth or status and everything to do with witnessing someone you love discover their true potential. "I think you're more than ready. And I think this could be exactly what the company needs to stay ahead of industry trends." We spent the rest of the evening outlining preliminary plans for the new division, discussing staffing needs and market research requirements and implementation timelines. It was the kind of strategic planning session I'd once conducted alone, making decisions without input from the person whose opinion mattered most to me. Now, working alongside Jessica, combining her fresh perspectives with my experience, I could see possibilities I'd never imagined when I was building the company in isolation. "There's something else," Jessica said as we were cleaning up the dinner containers. "What's that?" "I want to tell David's parents about you, about what you really do. I want them to meet Patricia Martinez, not the fiction you created." The suggestion made me nervous, but I understood why it was important to her. She was proud of what we'd built together, proud of the mother she'd finally gotten to know, and she wanted to share that pride with the people who mattered to her. "Are you sure you're ready for that conversation? It means explaining why I wasn't at David's family party, why I've been absent from so many important moments in your relationship." "I'm ready," David's been patient about meeting you, but he's also been curious about why his girlfriend's mother is so mysterious. His parents have started making assumptions that aren't fair to any of us. I could imagine what those assumptions might be. The absent mother who was too unstable or unreliable to participate in her daughter's life. The woman who couldn't be trusted with important family moments. The parent whose own problems were too overwhelming to allow her to support her successful daughter. What will you tell them? The truth. That you built a successful business while raising me as a single mother. That you taught me the values that made me who I am today. That you're one of the most accomplished women I know, and I'm proud to be your daughter. Hulk? The pride in her voice was something I'd dreamed of hearing for 5 years, during all those lonely evenings when I wondered if I'd sacrificed our authentic relationship for a protection neither of us actually needed. I'd like that, I said. I'd like them to know who you really are too. Not just the successful young woman they see, but the daughter of someone who understands what it takes to build something meaningful from nothing. 2 weeks later, I found myself getting ready for dinner at the Chen family home, choosing clothes that reflected who I actually was rather than who I'd pretended to be. I selected a navy blue dress that was elegant without being ostentatious, paired with jewelry that was tasteful but clearly expensive. I wanted to make a good impression, but I also wanted to be authentically myself. Jessica picked me up in the Tesla, both of us having agreed that arriving together would make the evening easier for everyone. During the drive to Westlake Hills, she briefed me on what she'd told David and his parents about my business. I explained that you built Martinez Facility Solutions from a single cleaning cart into one of the largest facility management companies in Texas. I told them about the corporate headquarters, the expansion plans, the focus on ethical business practices. David was impressed, and his parents are excited to meet someone who's built what you've built. What did you tell them about why they haven't met me before? That you value privacy, that you prefer to stay out of the social spotlight, while focusing on your business and family, which is true even if it wasn't the whole truth. The Chen family home was as impressive as Jessica had described, a sprawling contemporary structure with clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased professionally landscaped grounds. But unlike my first glimpse of Jessica's world, 5 years ago, I didn't feel intimidated or out of place. I belonged here not because of my wealth, but because of my accomplishments, my values, and my role as Jessica's mother. David's parents welcomed me with genuine warmth, and I could see immediately why Jessica felt comfortable with this family. They were successful but unpretentious, accomplished but kind, the type of people who measured others by character rather than bank accounts. "Sarah, we're so pleased to finally meet you," Mrs. Chen said, embracing me with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been looking forward to this introduction. "Jessica talks about you constantly. It's clear you've had a tremendous influence on the woman she's become." "Thank you. She's been my greatest joy and my proudest achievement." "And now she tells us you're building quite an empire of your own. Facility management across multiple states. Is that right?" "We've been fortunate to grow steadily over the years. It's been challenging but rewarding work." Mr. Chen joined our conversation, his handshake firm and his interest clearly genuine. "Jessica mentioned that you started with essentially nothing and built the company through determination and smart business practices. That's impressive in any industry, but particularly in one as competitive as facility services." "I had good motivation," I said, glancing at Jessica with a smile. "I wanted to create something that would provide security for both of us and opportunities for other people who were willing to work hard." The evening unfolded naturally, with conversations that ranged from business strategy to parenting philosophy to the challenges of maintaining ethical standards in competitive markets. I found myself genuinely enjoying the company, appreciating the opportunity to discuss my work with people who understood the complexities of building and running successful enterprises. During dinner, Mrs. Chen asked about my approach to scaling operations while maintaining quality standards, a challenge she'd faced in growing her own consulting firm. The conversation that followed was exactly the type of professional discussion I'd missed during my years of pretending to be someone I wasn't. The key is systems and culture, I explained. You can't be everywhere at once, so you have to create processes that ensure consistency and hire people who share your values. If your employees understand not just what to do, but why it matters, they'll make the right decisions even when you're not there to guide them. That's exactly what we've learned, Mr. Chen agreed. Cultural fit is often more important than technical skills, because skills can be taught, but values are much harder to change. Jessica has been tremendous at helping us maintain that balance as we've expanded. She understands both the operational side and the importance of keeping our core values intact as we grow. I saw Jessica beam at the praise, not because it came from her mother, but because it came from her boss, from someone whose professional opinion carried weight in the business community. As the evening continued, I realized that this was what I'd been afraid of losing during those 5 years of deception. Not the comfort of wealth or the recognition of success, but the simple pleasure of being known and accepted for who I actually was. The Chens appreciated my achievements, but they also saw me as Jessica's mother, as someone who'd raised a daughter they clearly loved and respected. "You should be very proud," Mrs. Chen told me as we were preparing to leave. "Jessica is exceptional, and it's clear that didn't happen by accident." "She is exceptional, but that's her own doing. I just tried to provide a foundation and get out of her way." "The best parents always say that," Mr. Chen observed with a laugh. "But foundation building is harder than most people realize, especially when you're doing it alone." During the drive home, Jessica was unusually quiet, but it was the comfortable silence of someone processing a positive experience, rather than the tense quiet that had characterized so many of our interactions over the past months. "That went well," she said finally. "It did. Your David's family is lovely. I can see why you enjoy spending time with them." "They were impressed with you. Mr. Chen told David that you're one of the most articulate business owners he's met. And Mrs. Chen said she could see where I get my strategic thinking abilities. They're generous with their compliments. They're honest people, Mom. They don't say things they don't mean." We rode in comfortable silence for a while, both of us reflecting on an evening that had marked another milestone in our rebuilt relationship. "I have something to tell you," Jessica said as we pulled into my building's garage. "What's that?" "I got a call today from the marketing firm that laid me off. They want me back. They've restructured their client relationships, and they have an opening for a senior marketing manager. It's a promotion from where I was before, with better pay and more responsibility." My heart sank a little, despite my genuine happiness for her success. After months of working together, of building both professional and personal connections, the thought of losing her from Martinez Facility Solutions felt like another kind of separation. "That's wonderful news, Miha. They obviously realized what they lost when they let you go. The thing is, I'm not sure I want to go back." "Why not? It sounds like exactly the kind of opportunity you were hoping for." "Because I've learned more about business in the past 6 months working with you than I learned in 2 years at the agency. Because I'm part of something meaningful at Martinez Facility Solutions. Something that's making a real difference in people's lives. Because I love working with you. Love being part of building something significant." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by concern that she was making the decision for the wrong reasons. "Jessica, you can't turn down career opportunities just to stay close to me. You have to make choices based on what's best for your professional development and your long-term goals. What if what's best for my professional development is learning from the woman who built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing? What if my long-term goal is to help expand that company into new markets and new services? Then I'd be honored to continue working with you. But I want to make sure you're choosing Martinez Facility Solutions because it's where you want to be, not because you feel obligated to stay." I'm choosing it because it's where I belong, because it's where I can make the biggest impact and learn the most, because it's where I get to work alongside the smartest businesswoman I know, who also happens to be my mother. 6 months later, Jessica and I were standing in the conference room of our new Dallas office, preparing to present the workplace consulting division to our first major client. The past year had been a whirlwind of expansion and innovation, with Jessica leading the development of services that combined traditional facility management with organizational development and employee engagement strategies. "Are you nervous?" I asked her as we reviewed our presentation materials one final time. "Excited," she corrected. "This is exactly what I dreamed about when I was sitting in that cafe worrying about my future. The chance to create something new, to solve complex problems, to build something meaningful with someone I respect and trust." The presentation went better than either of us had hoped. The client, a major technology company looking to redesign their corporate campus, was impressed with our integrated approach and our track record of success. By the end of the meeting, they'd committed to a pilot program that would serve as a model for the new division. "You were brilliant in there," I told Jessica as we walked back to our hotel. "We were brilliant. That's what makes this work so well. We complement each other's strengths and cover each other's weaknesses." Speaking of strengths, I have a proposition for you. "What kind of proposition?" "I've been thinking about succession planning, about what happens to Martinez Facility Solutions as I get older, and start thinking about stepping back from day-to-day operations." Jessica stopped walking, turning to face me with an expression of surprise and anticipation. "Are you thinking about retiring?" "Not retiring exactly, but transitioning into more of an advisory role while someone else takes over the operational leadership. Someone who understands the company's values and vision, who's proven herself capable of innovation and growth, who has the trust and respect of our employees and clients." "Mom, are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that if you're interested, I'd like to start preparing you to eventually take over as CEO of Martinez Facility Solutions. It would be a gradual transition, with increasing responsibilities and decision-making authority over the next few years." The offer represented everything I'd once been afraid to share with her. Not just the wealth I'd accumulated, but the legacy I'd built, the responsibility I'd carried, the impact I'd created through years of hard work and careful planning. "I'm interested," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what we were discussing. "But I want to earn it. I don't want to inherit the position just because I'm your daughter. I want to prove that I deserve it." "You've already started proving that. The workplace consulting division, the Dallas expansion, the client relationships you've built, all of that demonstrates your capabilities. But you're right that there's more to learn, more responsibility to take on gradually. Then let's do it. Let's build something together that will outlast both of us." As we stood on that Dallas street corner, talking about the future we would create together, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. 5 years of deception and distance, followed by months of rebuilding and rediscovery, leading to a partnership that was stronger than anything I could have achieved alone. The lies I'd told to protect our relationship had nearly destroyed it, but the truth had ultimately brought us closer than we'd ever been. Jessica knew me now, completely and authentically, and she'd chosen to build her future alongside mine, not out of obligation or necessity, but out of genuine respect and shared vision. "There's one more thing," I said as we walked back toward our hotel. "What's that?" "I love you, Mija. Not because of what you've accomplished or what you contribute to the business, but because you're my daughter. Because you're kind and smart and brave enough to forgive me for my mistakes. Because you saw through the lies to the love underneath and chose to build something real with me. I love you too, Mom. All of you. The successful businesswoman and the devoted mother, and even the flawed human being who thought she had to hide her achievements to protect her daughter." That evening, as I sat in my hotel room reviewing contracts and planning meetings for the next day, I felt a contentment I'd never experienced during my years of deception. Success meant nothing without someone to share it with, and wealth was meaningless without relationships built on truth and trust. Jessica and I had lost 5 years to lies and misunderstanding, but we'd found each other again through honesty and courage. We'd built something together that was stronger than either of us could have created alone, a partnership that honored both our individual strengths and our shared values. The woman who'd walked through that rain 5 years ago, humiliated and isolated by her own deceptions, was gone. In her place was someone who'd learned that authenticity was worth any risk, that love was stronger than fear, and that the most meaningful success was the kind you could share with the people who mattered most. Martinez Facility Solutions continued to grow and thrive, but its greatest achievement wasn't measured in revenue or market share. It was measured in the relationship between a mother and daughter who'd found their way back to each other through truth, forgiveness, and the courage to be authentically themselves. The charity case had become the benefactor, but more importantly, the stranger had become family again. And that transformation was worth more than all the luxury cars and penthouse apartments and business empires in the world. As I prepared for sleep that night, I thought about the text message that had started this journey, about Jessica's friends laughing at her mother who came to pick up leftovers at expensive restaurants. If they could see us now, working together as equals, building something meaningful that would impact thousands of lives, they might understand that the greatest luxury isn't what you can afford to buy, but what you're brave enough to share with the people you love. The rain had stopped years ago, but the growth it had watered was just beginning to bloom. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.